Unit 7, opener number 11, focuses on relations and functions. A relation is a set of ordered pairs. Stated another way, it is a set of inputs and their corresponding outputs. A special kind of relation is a function. A function is a relation in which each input is paired with exactly one output. What we are going to do is to look at each relation, which is represented by a map, and we're going to determine whether or not it's a function. Then we're going to list out what the domain and range of that relation or that function is. So when I look at my first example, I see this relation and I want to test to see if it's a function. If I look back at the definition, it's a relation in which each input is paired with exactly one output. So let's go through and test each of the inputs. Does 1 correspond to only one output? Yep, it corresponds to 0. Does 5 correspond to only one output? Yes, it corresponds to 12. Does 8 correspond with only one output? Yes, it corresponds with -9. So the first one is in fact a function. When I go to state the domain of that function, the domain is just the set of inputs. So what I can do is I can use curly brackets to represent a set of numbers. And then I like to list the inputs in order from smallest to biggest. So I'm going to list 1, 5, 8, and close my curly brackets. The range is the set of outputs. I'm going to do the same thing and use a curly bracket and state the numbers in order from smallest to biggest. So it's -9, 0, 12. Next, let's move over to the right and do the same thing. Does 18 correspond with only one unique output? Yes, it corresponds with 12. Does 53 correspond with only one output? Yes, it corresponds with 6. Does -89 correspond to only one output? Yes, it corresponds to 12. So this one also satisfies our definition of a function. You might be confused because you see that 2 of the inputs actually correspond with the same output. They correspond with 12. And that's okay, because the definition doesn't say anything about doubling up and corresponding to the same output. All it says is that each input is paired with exactly one output, and it's true. 18, 53, and -89 each only correspond with one output, so it is in fact a function. So when I list out the domain, I'm going to list out the possible set of inputs from smallest to biggest. So I'm going to start with -89, then 18, then 53. For the range of the function, I guess since we didn't use the 0, I'll leave it out of my range, and I'll just list the set of numbers 6 and 12 as my possible outputs. Now let's check out this third relation. Does 101 correspond to exactly one output? Nope, it corresponds to 2 different outputs. So right away I can eliminate this as being a function. Hopefully you see the difference between this one and the second one. Even though 18 corresponded to 12 and -89 also corresponded to 12, this one was still a function. This example was different because 101, the input, corresponded to 2 different outputs. And that means that while it's still a relation, it's not a function. I can still list the domain and range if I want to, even though it's not a function. The domain is my set of inputs, -19, 101, 204. And my range is my set of outputs, 21, 355, 832. Moving on to the fourth example, I see this relation has a little bit less going on. The 1 isn't used, but that's okay. It doesn't mean that it's not a function just because we didn't use one of our inputs. So let's see. Does 5 correspond to only one output? Yes. Does 8 correspond to only one output? Yes. So this one is also a function. For the domain, let's skip the 1 because we didn't use it, and let's just say that 5 is an input and 8 is an input. And for the range, let's do the same thing. 5 is an output and 8 is an output. And finally, for the last one, does 101 correspond to only one output? 21. Does -19 correspond to only one output? 21. Does 204 correspond with only one output? 21. So yes, this is a function. It's a constant function because all of the inputs are corresponding to the same output, but that's okay, it's still a function. The domain is -19, 101, and 204. And the range has only one number in it, 21. So, for a quick summary, when you're determining whether or not a relation is a function, you want to make sure that each input corresponds to one and only one unique output.